were gonna guess, in your mind, did it become not devaluing to an instrument to refret it? How far back does that go?
Well, first you have to have somebody who's good enough to do the job
Right.
right. And so I would say that it depends a whole lot on who's doing the refret
That's right.
job. It used to be that the quality of repair work was just miserable
Right.
back in the 50s and 60s. Most of the guys were just plain butchers. But you know, if John D'Angelico did it, or Jimmy DeQuisto did it, it probably would have been good. But so far as really getting great fret work, I would say that maybe by the mid-70s there were a few people who did good work. But most of the repair work I've seen that was done even before late 70s would be about when it started getting even the work that we did in 1970 through 75 compared to what we do now wouldn't pass inspection. The quality of work you wouldn't pass most. You've seen some of those Randy Wood neck sets that were done.
Sure.
And some of the fret jobs, they wouldn't pass our shop now. The quality of repair work is really good. The quality of repair work that Martin used to do early on was nowhere near as good as their building was. Building was good, but many people who are great builders were rotten repairmen.
That's right.
They were more inclined to just replace parts rather than repair them.
Yeah.
And it used to be that prior to the 70s, just barely beginning in the 60s, people were realizing that old was good, but we couldn't get good work. Nobody knew how to do a good neck set. So to do repairs that enhanced rather than detract from value, a lot of that, I'd say, didn't even happen until the 80s. Because most of the repair work, for example, if you took a guitar to Martin or Gibson and you took it to their repair shop, they ruined it.
Right.
They would put whatever the newest component is.
Right.
If there was a crack in the top, they put a new top on.
Right.
Or if the guitar needed a neck set, Gibson didn't know how to do that. They just took a hacksaw and sawed the neck off, chiseled out the dovetail joint, and put in a newest neck that didn't match the original. They had 13 guys in the repair shop when I visited them in 1969, and their entire job was to ruin guitars. Everything they touched, they ruined. And Martin wasn't much better.
That's a great question. At what point or what general time
When
frame
did
did
guitar
that change?
repair actually
Right,
enhance
and I
value?
totally agree.
Right.
It really didn't matter though until you got past the 90s, because the values of instruments were still so low. I mean, when you can in the early 90s get a Sunburst Les Paul for what, 15, 20 grand?
Well,
The repairs didn't matter as much. They mattered way more.
actually, it did matter. I mean, even in the 70s, you know, like everything that Shock Jackson did at Showbud ruined the instrument. And we were well aware of that. And the quality repair work that my own shop was doing in the 70s was way
Oh yeah, that's a
better
fact.
than
That's a
what
fact.
most others were doing. But it still wouldn't pass our standards
That's
today.
Okay, all right. This is what I'm really driving at. Okay, in 2023, I've got two guitars sitting here. Let's pick a model, pick a blue chip model. Let's pick a 1958 Les Paul Gold Top standard. Let's say I've got two guitars sitting here, and they're both exactly 7.5 out of 10 condition. Both 100% original. Two of them sitting here. One of them has original frets, and one of them has been expertly refretted. Is there a difference in the value?
Right now, hardly any difference if you do
Agreed.
it really, really right.
Agreed.
Right. So like
And
zero.
the same, we could say the same thing for violins. you know, Stradivari and Guarneri and Guadagnini's, all of those, every one of them has been reworked.
That's right.
And
That's
if
right.
they weren't, they wouldn't be playable.
That's right.
So that we get to the point where these days, if you have a pristine, perfect D45, but it has string tension on it for its whole life, probably needs a neck set, and probably in order to make it really play right, it's going to take a refret because the next contour is going to be off a bit. If you don't do it, what's worth more, a D45 that looks good but is unplayable because it's in its original condition, or one that looks equally good and has a really expert neck set and refret so that it's actually usable? And I would rather have a usable one.
And you say zero difference in price?
Well, actually, the one that's in original condition is worth whatever it is, minus the cost of fixing it to play.
Right.
I'd rather have the one that's fixed up to play. If all that we could do, having a repair shop, is every time we touched it and worked on it, we devalued it, what the fuck would I need all those guys upstairs for? I wouldn't need you.
Damn.
Right.
No, I get you. I get you. I get it. Bam. I get it.
Yeah.
You have to be, the repair shop upstairs is on the floor of the building.
Of course. And
It's there because it enhances value.
Right.
It's not just because we charge people to work on their guitar, because actually we're not even wanting to take in outside work right now except for really good customers because we're so backlogged fixing our own. And the reason we fix our own is it's enhancing value to do it.
That's right.
But so much of the previous work that we encounter was bad. In fact, I would say that fully half, if not 2/3 of the work that you do upstairs is undoing other people's botched previous work.
Yeah. That's
So,
been the case for a long
The
time.
fact is, we enhance value upstairs, but the quality of the work has to be good enough to enhance value. It's like, suppose you have a car. It's a collectible, wonderful automobile. And you get into an accident.
Like a 92 Pontiac Fiero.
Shots fired.
Suppose
75 Pinto.
that,
Close.
well,
I
there was
thought-
one out in the parking lot at the Opry last night. It was a 1947 Cadillac.
Yeah.
It had been fully restored. It was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Sure.
But now suppose you have, he also wanted $130,000 for it, but suppose you have a collectible automobile and you get into a wreck. Well, if you do an expert repair job, it may not be worth as much as it was before the wreck, but it's worth a hell of a lot more than it was immediately after the wreck. Yeah, it would be wonderful to find a pre-World War II D45 that the strings had been left slack, had never had neck tension on it, hadn't been used. Yeah, that's going to bring more.
I thought your car analogy was going to go towards tires, original tires on a 54.
Well, we don't need original
B,
cars. Well,
which is
actually,
like frets
cars,
in that way. you know.
most of them, you know, by the time they're 1947, if it had leather seating or fabric seating, the seats are probably completely worn out. But if it's been mothballed, perfect, pristine, yeah, that's worth a lot. But it's rare, you know, most of them need work. But my repair shop enhances value.
Right.
Anything sent to Showbud, reduced value.
Right.
Anything sent actually even to Martin or Gibson, either one of them, for repair, reduced value. Because Martin, like Brett Smiley's guitar, was a pre-war D45, but they sent it to Martin when it had a crack in the back, and they put a new back on it that didn't even match, didn't even have pearl on it. It was just a D28 back. And I had another time that we got in a pre-war D45 snowflake inlay, but it had a new back and it was refinished and refretted, and it was worth a small fraction of what it would have been worth had it been I'd rather have it with a big crack and busted up. We could have fixed it.
Right.
But when they got done with it, we couldn't restore it to what it
Right.
would have been.
Right.
And repair, the whole point of doing repair is to make them playable and also to enhance value. Why would I pay people upstairs to do all that work if it only devalued the guitars? That would be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But, so a lot of people ask me, how much is it going to reduce the value to refret it? Well, if your frets are already worn out, that's not original spec.
Right. That's a fact.
So,
That's a fact.
would you rather have
Yeah.
replacement, perfect condition frets that look right, or original style, or original spec is not worn out frets that you can't play?
What
It's
about a
not
change
neck
there?
angle.
What about a change in nut on a guitar? Does that bother you?
Well, the reason to change a nut usually is it needs it.
Right.
And you know why it needs it? Because some idiot worked on it and cut them and screwed around with it, so it's no longer original spec.
Right.
Nuts don't usually wear out, but people amateurs adjust them and cut them and recut them and change them so they're no longer original spec. In effect, it may be the original nut, but it's been modified, so it's not original anymore. I don't hesitate to replace that. Or if you have a Gibson F5 mandolin and the pick guard is crumbling, we're going to put another guard on, because it's one thing, if you don't take it off, it's going to hurt the instrument. And if you repair a crack, if you do it really, really well, it's going to be an improvement. But you see a heck of a lot of crack repairs that are horrible work. And some repairs are extremely difficult to undo. If you don't know what to do, you have to know what to do, what not to do, and how to do it.
Yeah.
And how to do it is something that you've already seen changes in how a neck set is done. It used to be, John Lundberg, which is, that California neck set, they'd undo the whole area here, scrunch it together, cut off the so-called excess wood and glue it back together with torque. And
Cut down the back and contort
and
the
then
sides.
later Randy Wood would just cut right through here, take that fret out, cut it, lift this part of the board off, cut through the board completely, put water into the dovetail joint, stick a soldering iron into it, and then wiggle it, and sometimes you'd even break the heel doing it, and it would slop water around. We don't do that.
No.
The way we do a neck set now is vastly different.
With that being said, Randy Wood, in my opinion,
he was
legend.
better than the other California necks.
Agreed, but he's like a legend because I can't think of anybody else that did that. And I'm sure you could mention some obscure fellow that might have attempted it, but Randy did it under your roof, and that's the first
he
time.
was doing some of that before.
Good. Well, either way,
He was doing it
respect to
in
Randy
Shoals,
because
Alabama.
he was doing neck resets at a point in time when Martin guitars, their
Martin said
official
the necks
position,
were impossible. Martin's official view.
official view was that it was an
Even in
impossibility.
writing, I've seen it.
That's right.
It's impossible to undo a dovetail joint. Can't be done.
That's right.
So what they would do is they would take all the frets out, plane the board, so it would be paper thin up here and full thickness here, and then they'd shave the bridge down. And when they got done, to do it right, you need a complete new fingerboard. You
right.
still need a neck set, and you need a new bridge.
That's right.
So
That's right. So that's what I'm
If
saying.
you
Randy
do
Wood, when he
it
came
right,
out, that was pretty righteous of him,
the techniques for repair are way better now. Violins were built where you could take them apart easily, but the guitars are not. And when they built many of the Martin guitars or Gibson guitars, they never dreamed that people would actually care about them 50 or 70 or 100 years later. They were figuring that they'd be obsolete in 10 years or 20 years, whatever. And they really didn't build them with repair in mind. But there's a big difference between rehydrating it and getting it together and working with it versus putting a big splice in the top.
Right. And being an instrument repairman is a fairly new
repair is very different from building.
Yeah.
There's a lot of builders who are remarkably good builders are terrible repairmen, and there's a good number of repair people who are great restoration artists, like David Lautner.
Well,
Great repairman.
Oh, yeah.
Lousy builder, but he did
Yeah.
great repairs.
Dynamo, yeah.
You've seen a couple of guitars he made, those electrics, they
Yeah.
weren't very good at all.
No, he had a different thing going. He was a genius in his finish.
Well, he did more than finish. He could do crack repairs.
Yeah, he was
and other
really good,
stuff.
man. He was
He
really
did
good.
structural
Always like that.
repairs, but repair and building are not the same.
No,
And the
they're not.
quality of repair today is vastly improved, and the techniques used in repair, I mean, also the equipment available to use it, getting the right saws, the right rasps, and a lot of that was even hard to get in 1970. Good hand tools.
You have to make them. I found myself making hand tools even in the late 90s.
Well,
early
now you can
2000s.
buy hand tools. Before,
That's
the
right.
only way to get them was to make them yourself.
I still have them.
But
It's
there
so
were a lot of
funny.
hand
There's
tools
a certain
that
school
used
of
to be
people.
available for hand work. But still, the art of guitar repair has evolved vastly improvement since I went into business.
Yeah.
Some of those improvements were happening here and some were happening elsewhere, but the point is overall, as the value of the guitars went up, also the incentive to fix them right
That's right.
went up.
And only since 1970, we're talking 53 years now. What is the most abominable single example of a butchered guitar you've ever seen in your entire life?
I've seen quite a few. But, you know, we see really dumb stuff. It's not necessarily repair, but I've seen a Sunburst Les Paul that somebody took a hacksaw to and converted it to double cutaway. And Mike Bloomfield's Telecaster,
That's right.
that's exactly what was done to that. And that was on the cover of Vintage Guitar Magazine as a great find. Pickups had been replaced and the body was modified where Mike wouldn't even recognize it. I don't see that that's a piece of memorabilia anymore. I think it's been transformed into something that's a piece of shit.
On that note, George, on the topic of repair guys, great repair guys that have been in the business for some time, Joe Glazier.
Yeah.
Joe Glazier, and I make mention of him because I just caught that video that you guys did at Blackbird.
Yeah.
What a great video.
Oh, dude.
I love Joe. I love his take on things. He's such a great representative for
No doubt.
the instrument repair world.
No doubt.
He's a great representative. He's a great guy.
Mm.
And a lot of what he does was absolutely unthinkable in
I know.
1970.
I know, respect, yeah.
And you know, most of a great deal of the work we do upstairs was, nobody was doing anything
Yeah.
like that back then, including my own shop in 1970 was not doing work that I would consider up to the standards we're doing today.
So we can safely say,
I knew better.
Right.
I knew I
Right.
was frustrated with
Right.
the work that
Right.
I saw.
yeah,
Because it was devaluing instruments, and there's a lot of instruments that I would simply set aside and wait until we figured out how to do
right,
it.
exactly.
Because
So we can-
there's this mentality, you gotta fix it now.
Right.
Now,
Wait.
if you just loosen the strings and you keep it at the right temperature and humidity, it can stay there for 50 years until somebody comes along and figures out how to fix it.
Right.
So it's better to put it in suspended animation
Totally.
and let it be
I love
that
that.
way, because upstairs is our surgery department.
Right.
And, you know, if you have an animal or a person and you're injured, you gotta fix it right away. And there's a limited amount of time you can
Right.
keep it in anesthesia too, or it'll die. But with a guitar, just, it's busted, loosen the strings, keep it at the right temperature and humidity until you figure out how to work on it. And it can stay there for years until
Right.
you figure it out, or until the right guy comes along who knows how to fix it. And then you also don't have to rush the work. It's, surgery on living animals and people is way different. We can take our time to do these.
Right. So we can safely say, once and for all, that an expert refret does not devalue a guitar.
It enhances value to, if it's got worn out frets, it enhances value to refret it. Now, would I take a 58 Les Paul with small frets and put great big frets in it? No. That would not be a good thing to do. If you have perfectly fine frets, is it going to enhance value to put big frets that you might like? If you want a hot rod them that way, I wouldn't do that. But I've seen things like people come to a guitar show and they had a Firebird 5, a beautiful guitar, they put a Bigsby on it. Well, that ruins it. And he said, I said, why did you do that? Well, I couldn't play it without it. I had to do it. No, you don't. He could have taken that thing, sold it for $15,000 or more. He didn't care enough about it. He could have bought a guitar he liked that had a Bigsby and had $10,000 left over.
Right.
Instead, he took a valuable guitar and messed it up. Or you see things like somebody has a guitar and they have a case. The body fits, but the peg head's too long. Well, one approach they do is they take a hacksaw and they cut the end of the case out so the thing sticks out. The other approach I've seen several times is, the tuner's end here, so you don't need this part of the peg head. So if it doesn't fit in the case, just lop that off. But if you do that on a guitar that was worth 50 grand left alone, that's not smart.
I like to see.
Stupid.
I like to see when you see that sometimes when you see like peg heads actually poke out of the cases.
Yeah.
No,
A
that's
little
what I was
bit.
describing.
No, I know, and they always look like shoes.
Yeah.
That you grow out of, you know.
I've seen
You know?
examples where they take things like either pre-war B45 and refinish it and sand it so it's so thin that they ruin the guitar. You can't restore it. They take a guitar that today would be worth $500,000 and they've turned it into some unrestorable nothing.
How about when somebody takes a 50s maple neck Fender that has beautiful wear on the fretboard and then they refret it and they mow all that stuff
that's
off
not smart.
and refinish?
Yeah,
Oh,
the point is bad
hurts.
judgment.
That's my number one
That
pet peeve. Never do
There's
it.
an awful lot of people who also want a hot rod instruments.
Never done
And
one.
you've seen lots of examples. I mean, even some very good players
Yeah.
have mutilated their
That's
instruments. That was routine back in the 1950s. There was one guy in town, Dean Porter, and everybody, a lot of session players were taking their guitars. He was a total butcher. But he would make them play, at least temporarily. But he'd do the California neck sets and worse stuff. He was a total hack. But Chet Atkins recommended him, and Brett hired him to help design guitars.
I love the word hack.
Yeah.
It's
It
such
was,
great.
Do you apply that? What we just talked about, Tom. The biggest pet peeve?
Yes.
Make a chord, refret,
Yes.
chord finish.
Oh.
And I said, you know what, dude, never done one.
Yeah.
But then I said, wait a minute, never done one? No, I've never done one like that. However,
Yeah.
I've done plenty of 70s
Yeah.
tellies
Yeah. With the big poly.
with the thick poly,
Yeah.
and you excavate the frets out of that heavy poly coat.
Yeah.
All the poly comes off, you true it up. Beautiful, nice, clean, thin coat of lacquer, frets go over it.
Yeah.
It is probably 200 times better.
Than the original.
Facts.
Yeah. It's
From
all-
70s, but anything prior to that,
Yes.
100% with you. If you take a 50s Strat,
Yeah.
whatever it might be with that beautiful finger gouging and all of that, my biggest pet peeve is when that stuff gets filled in.
Yeah.
It's like, here's a great idea. Let's go ahead and fill it full of putty.
Mm.
It just never seems like they should.
Where you actually done that?
Oh, you see it all the time. As a matter of fact, when you see instruments, it's the dips that you see in the fingerboard. That's not from the string. That's from the fingernail.
Right.
Right, kind of scooping it away. So when you do a fret job and the frets come out, you play on the board. The first couple of passes of sandpaper with a sanding stick reveals exactly where those dips are. Some people want to get those dips out. If you left dips, then you didn't do it right. Real players and so on and so forth would get irate if you took most of that out. But then on top of that, you can go in and say, well, instead of sanding it down, just fill it in with some epoxy. And then wait till it cures and it'll sand it all down and it'll make it look great. You know, that's my pet peeve. And then when you put oil on it, it always shines differently than the surrounding area.
Yeah.
You know, filled with super glue and oh god, it's a gross look. I don't like that. You know, I don't like touching too much of the board on a refret. You know, folks are like you got to take the inlays out to go ahead and do the fret job. And I said, yeah, sometimes, yeah, but if you do a fret job like this and your neck is already looking good, you shouldn't take what 1% off that board. You shouldn't even really get to the inlays to sand on them because you would have trued it up and you can do a lot of that work in the frets too.
Thank you for filming this.
Yeah, man, no problem.
Thank you for